Yeah. Welcome back to the Sideline Story Podcast. Boy, Ray Swish. I got my co-host, Queso and B Mill. What's up, fellas?
What's going on,
Chilling,
man? Happy
man.
to be
Chilling,
here, brother.
man.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. So I seen something on Twitter the other day. I just want to talk about it, which I thought it was going to be kind of dope. It was basically a what if. Tracy McGrady, Yao Ming, Grant Hill, Brandon Roy, Derrick Rose. If these players never get hurt, who has the best career? So I'm thinking this is. Do y'all take this as like from an accolade standpoint or from a statistical standpoint? What y'all thinking?
For me, when I made my choice, I did kind of like an overall. I took everything into consideration. So yeah, I just did like an overall, like looking at their stats and looking like what they potential, what they could have been, what they had already done, trajectory. So yeah, I kind of took everything into consideration and made my choice.
Uh,
Yeah, go ahead, man.
yeah. For me, only I didn't take statistics because if those guys stay healthy, they all probably continue their sets. So I'm more or less leaning toward accolades.
B-Man, who you choose for this segment?
Uh, I mean, I gotta get into my whole spiel, man.
Do your thing.
You want me to jump it off?
Hey, I'm gonna just say it like this. However you wanna like dress it up, like do your thing. This your time.
All right, cool. So we got the list of 4 people. So I actually spent a good amount of time thinking on this one though. So let me break it down to y'all. Let me you see the gray hoodies on.
Yeah, I see great hoodie looks, man. Do you
gray hoodies on, y'all. All right, cool. So I'm gonna be brief and get right into it. So as far as the stats goes, so you got Tracy McGrady, Derrick Rose, Brandon Roy, Yao Ming. If they never get hurt, we assume that they continue those numbers. And only thing that probably affects their numbers, maybe team situations that we cannot really account for, and their age. So we will assume that healthy these guys progress with the numbers that they kind of whatever their peak was, we assume that they continue that peak. So that's why I didn't really factor in the numbers because they all will probably continue the numbers. So after that, what you got? You got accolades. So the way I kind of like the perspective that I had, I thought about like the era these players was in and what was kind of happening around those times. So I looked at who I think, as far as accolades go, we're probably talking about MVPs and championships. Kind of keep it so simple to those two. Those are probably the biggest individual awards that you can probably get as a player. So I'll start with Tracy McGrady. So Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming kind of gonna group them together because they played a bit of time together. So both great players. I probably had them. I don't got neither one of them number one. I look at the era that they kind of played in. Yao Ming was great, but at that time when Yao Ming was kind of peaking, he probably played like a good 8 years. He had to deal with Tim Duncan and Shaq. So from an accolade standpoint, I don't really see him winning a championship. So he wouldn't be my number one. Tracy McGrady is interesting. I think Tracy McGrady was one of the top tier talents at that position. But the problem with Tracy McGrady is that there was a lot of competition around those times. So we got Vince Carter, we got Kobe, we had Dwayne Wade at the time. So even that position, it was a lot of competition at that time. So again, I don't see him pulling through to get no championships. If you want to say by the time that he was in Houston, he would have ran into the same problems as Yao Ming with Shaq, Kobe, them Tim Duncan Spurs. I don't see them being able to win a championship either. Um, Brandon Roy, for me, is probably the most unfortunate one on this list because I think we saw the least of his prime. I think he had the shortest lifespan, the shortest window. Uh, Brandon Roy was cooking. He was definitely cooking when he was on this game, but it only lasted a few years. And I looked at the roster that he would have had as far as what type of accolades he would have been able to get as far as championships and MVPs. At that time, he was kind of like a LaMarcus Aldridge, Brandon Roy. Again, they kind of run into the same problems as Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming. It's going to be tough for them to overcome the Shaq era with that San Antonio Spurs era. So I don't got him. Then we got Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose, probably the simplest one. he would have just beat his head against LeBron for all of those years. I think he plays LeBron 10 times in the playoffs, probably lose all 10 times. At that time, LeBron was just what he's become. I just don't see Derrick Rose being able to overcome him to be able to win any type of championships. So I think his accolades would have been limited to maybe that one MVP. Maybe he grabs another one. So I think a lot of these players are just victims of the players that were around them at the time. So that leaves the one that I got, which is Grant Hill. So I had Grant Hill as being the best player here without injuries. And the reason why I had Grant Hill, because I remember Grant Hill when I was a kid, and it was very few players I tried to like least than Grant Hill. I tried so hard not to like Grant Hill because he played for the Pistons, and I didn't like the Pistons. But to put Grant Hill into perspective, when I was a kid, there was real debates on should we be drinking Sprite before games, and should we not be wearing these Jordans, and should we be asking our moms for felines? So for me, Grant Hill had a big influence over kind of my childhood as far as hooping goes, and he kind of came in the era that was like right after Michael, before the Spurs kind of took off. So I feel like with Grant Hill's talent, he probably would have been the only person I thought would have been able to have championship success because he would have came after the Jordan era, and he would have been kind of right there, right before the Spurs kind of take off. So when I look at all these players and the circumstances, Grant Hill's potential, what he was kind of projected to be, I got to go ahead and take Grant Hill. Probably has the best career had he not got hurt. All these guys was unfortunate that they did get hurt, but Tracy McGrady was kind of trending towards the GOAT discussion, where a lot of those guys maybe not had done enough to quite get there, but for me, I would go with Tracy McGrady would have had the best career had he not got hurt.
Okay. You want me to go next?
Do you think?
So for me, it came down to really just two. I think we pretty much had the top two, T-Mac and Grant Hill. And for me, as a kid, I was a huge T-Mac fan. So I had like the patent leather blue T-Macs with the silver lines on them. I had them kicks. Like I wanted to be T-Mac because him and Kobe was kind of dueling at that time. They was both considered like the best scorers in the game. So I was a huge T-Mac fan. But if I'm going off of who I feel would have had the best career, I think it has to be Grant Hill. Like, especially if you go and pinpoint on his best season, which was that 99-2000 season, like Grant Hill was the man. Like I just think about like them old school Pistons jerseys with the black horse on them and how he was balling. Like he was really like almost like a LeBron before LeBron. Like he could score. He finished third in the league in scoring that year behind only Shaq and AI. He could rebound, he could pass, he could defend, he could literally do everything. He wasn't playing on that great of a team. And so I just look at like that potential what he could have did. And like even he didn't even get to really play in the playoffs because he hurt that ankle like right before the playoffs started, tried to play through it, and it got worse. And then obviously we know that was his last time as a Piston. He ended up moving on to Orlando. But like his ankle injury just got so bad. But like, man, when he was in his prime, and he was right at 26, 27 years old right at that time too. Like he was just entering like his prime, and he was just such a dominant player. Like there was nothing on the court that he couldn't do. He could shoot it, shot about 35% from three. He could score from 3 levels, which there wasn't a lot of guys that could do that in the league at that time. Like he was really kind of ahead of his time as far as being a player goes. I will say T-Mac was probably the better scorer. T-Mac is still considered one of the greatest scorers the game's ever seen. But T-Mac, we already know defensively, he kind of lacked. He was a little bit lazy. And he was kind of you kind of see he would kind of check himself out of games sometimes. Like he would kind of get lost in the game and not really go too hard. Whereas Grant Hill, night in, night out, you know what he was getting. He was a workhorse. He was going at it no matter who he was playing, even though his team wasn't the greatest. He was kind of trying to be the best. T-Mac had Yao Ming to lean on for some years. He had some couple good teams that could have did some things, but yeah, for me, it's Grant Hill. I could see him like getting a bunch more All NBA teams for sure. I feel like they kind of did him a little dirty in the MVP voting that season he had. I think he finished like 8th, which I feel like was way too low for him. But yeah, for me, it's got to be T-Mac. No disrespect to D Rose or you know, or it got to be Grant Hill. No disrespect to D Rose and those other guys, but Grant Hill was just ahead of his time, man. Me.
All right. Y'all don't think we saw a nice sample size of Tracy McGrady?
I do.
Because I kind of was questioning why he was on the list. I do get it because he definitely has some injuries that played him. I do remember one significant year. I believe it was the year they had Yao Ming run on tests like Aaron Brooks. I believe Matt got hurt around right before the playoffs. I want to say this was 2009. Mill, you a Laker fan. I think this was the year y'all played the Celtics the first time. No. Was it? That was 08. That was 08. That was 08.
Second time.
So, yeah, it was around that 08-09 mark. Mac had got hurt, and that team still pushed the Lakers to like 6-7 games. I think if he was healthy, that would have been real interesting. But I feel like we got to see T-Mac. We got to see him. I feel like we got to see him at his peak, kind of, because Orlando Tracy McGrady, that was like 30 a game. He was just a slightly older by the time he got to Houston, but by that time I don't know if I guess you could say we saw him at his apex. I kind of agree with what you said about D Rose, BA. As far as the LeBron factor, I don't know how much that roster would have shaped up to been able to beat LeBron, even with an emerging Jimmy Butler. I know Jimmy wasn't Jimmy at that time, but I just don't know if a Jimmy and a D Rose would have been enough to like overthrow LeBron. I kind of can't see it. I thought about it. I talked to a coworker about it. He doesn't think that Jimmy would have became Jimmy. I definitely think the other opposite end of that. I think Jimmy would have still been an all-star even with D Rose. D Rose don't give me the ball and get out my way vibes. He just doesn't give me that. Brandon Roy, like you said, it just kind of goes with him and Greg Oden is kind of hand in hand because the way that roster was orchestrated, you would have think for the next 10 years they was going to take over the West. But the problem is, I just don't know how much better than the Lakers they would have been. The Thunder was on the way. Golden State was a little later. They may have been a little older by that point. So I guess it is just a product of the players that was playing in the league at the same time as a lot of these guys. Because I'm gonna choose Grant Hill. But the problem with Grant Hill is the year he went to Orlando was the year that Kobe and Shaq put it together, and they won 3 in a row. So how does that work? You get peak T-Mac, you get a healthy Grant Hill. Say they do make it to a finals or two. We know they're coming up short for sure. So from an accolade standpoint, I feel like a lot of these guys fall off short. So I'm looking at it from a statistical standpoint. They could just put up great numbers because I do think a team with Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill, there's too much talent there to not make the finals. The only obstacle I could really see them having was the Detroit Pistons, and only because from the defensive part, like Tayshaun, Chauncey, Rip, Lindsey Hunter, there's a lot of guys that's like these are top level defenders. I feel like that would have been their biggest obstacle. Rasheed Wallace may have not been there; he wouldn't have been there yet. So New Jersey, you had the New Jersey Nets. They was very competitive. Right, you had the Bucks before Ray Allen went to Seattle. So the East would have been real competitive. And you talked about it, B-Mill, if they hadn't fumbled the Tim Duncan free agency, so it would have been Tim, Grant Hill. I know you heard about that, okay? So
yeah,
Tim, Grant Hill, and T-Mac, that would have been, man, that could have been interesting for sure. But yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go with Grant Hill, and this really coming from a statistical standpoint, not an accolade, because I don't know what all he would have been able to accomplish, even with a healthy teammate. I can't talk myself into them beating the Lakers. This is not happening.
You said something kind of interesting though when you mentioned Brandon Roy and Greg Oden. Like that would have been an interesting dynamic if they both would have reached their peaks, because obviously Greg Oden was the top pick and he never really got it going at all in the league. Brandon Roy got it going for a small bit of time. So if we saw both of them at their peak, that's like a real like a big and a guard combo that really could have dominated, like kind of like what Shaq and Kobe did. So it would have been interesting to see what they could have did or how far they could have went with that combo, but it just wasn't to be, I guess.
Do you think can they? Okay, you got B. Roy, you got LaMarcus, you got Greg. That's on paper. If everybody's healthy, that's just as good as it gets as a big three goes.
Yeah.
Who's the point guard? Was it Andre Miller?
At the time, I think Miller was he was probably still the starter back then, yeah. And then who else was on that roster? That was before like Z-Bo.
That was after Z-Bo.
They were after Z-Bo?
Yeah, that was after. That should have been way after, if I'm not mistaken.
I might be wrong. Yeah.
I think Z-Bo and Rasheed Wallace played together. And when they traded Rasheed Wallace, then Z-Boy emerged. And then I think he went to New York shortly after. I could be wrong, but that's kind of how I remember. But do you think that team can be a threat to the Lakers? Because once the Lakers got Paul Gasol, like 07, 08, it was kind of like mini dynasty around that time. Like they just kept the championships rolling in. You think they could? And Andrew Bynum kind of came along, figured it out. Trevor Reeves and Shannon Brown.
I think it would have been competitive because I'm looking at the roster now. You got Aldridge. They had young Nicholas Batum, Jared Bayless, Steve Blake was the point guard.
Steve Blake, okay, Steve Blake.
Shannon Fry was another serviceable big. Greg Oden, Joel Prisbilla, who was not bad. But yeah, so they had a solid squad. It would have definitely competed with that Lakers team. But yeah, they had an alright little team, man, for sure.
So he got drafted in 2006. He stopped playing in 2013. So around the time he started to put it together was around the time that the Lakers got rolling back in the swing of things, how we know them. Like I said, with the Paul Gasol trade, with Andrew Bynum emerging as an all-star caliber player, would they have been too young to kind of,
Yeah, I would probably say a little too young, a little bit. Because Aldridge was only 2 years in. Batum was a rookie. Bayless was a rookie. So, yeah, they were going to be a little bit too young.
All right. So, let me ask you this then. The crazy part about that is shortly after, in theory, they would have put it together. You would have had that team in Oklahoma City. They would have put it together because they made the finals in 2012.
Yeah.
So, if you look at Brandon Roy, if you look at like the years in his career, they would have had to. They would have met at some point. They would have clashed. They would have had to.
Yeah.
A young KD, young Harden, young Russ.
I think I think to me the key piece is Oden. If Oden would have panned out to be what he's supposed to be, I probably would take the Trailblazers in this series. Like I think I really would have took them, but he's the big question mark, man. That's a 7-footer. Was supposed to be able to, man, defensive. He was supposed to be like the anchor, and he was kind of able to score, give you 15 to 20. But he just, I think that's the biggest question mark right there.
BA, if this Portland Trailblazer team is healthy, do you think history has changed, or do you think it stays the same?
It's the same because I know we're talking about the Lakers being like the top, but they're not going to beat them Spurs teams. Like the Spurs was it at the time. There's no way you're going to get past that Tim Duncan and whatever Particle Y, that Tony Parker, that Mandel. It wasn't happening. So whether they was going down to the Lakers, if they didn't go down to the Lakers, they was going down to the Spurs. The Spurs were just too formidable at those times. And I don't even, and that's not to say what Phoenix and Dallas was looking like at those times too. Those are some other playoff teams. So maybe I'll say Portland was better than those two, but if the Lakers didn't catch them, then the Spurs definitely would have. The Spurs was just too formidable at that time. Too experienced at that time. They roster was just too deep. They had the coach, and them young kids would have been in trouble.
So I'm looking at it. B. Roy was 28 when he stopped. So the Spurs, because the Spurs went like what? They won in the last championship they won before Duncan won his last one. They won in 2007 when they swept LeBron. They didn't win again in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
So around that 28, 29, 30, you think like whoever Brandon Roy is, this is final form Brandon Roy. And the problem with that is you got Kawhi Leonard, who emerges as probably the best perimeter defender. So with that dynamic, you might have a point actually. And Greg Oden was never like we looked at him as like he's gonna be the defensive anchor. He's gonna be the rebounding foundation for the team. LaMarcus, he gonna shoot that 15, 17 footer. Him and Brandon Roy gonna combine for like 50, sometimes 60 if needed. So I think Greg Popovich probably figured some things out, and I think the team was just too deep. I don't know what moves Portland would have made because I'm pretty sure you got to speed up the timeline. Well, not speed up timeline, but speed up the process because this big three, they would have been aging a little bit, so you might have to make some moves. What you think, Queso?
Yeah, I think either way, go to West would have been a gauntlet. Back then, the West was super tough, just as tough as it is now. The West was super tough. You still had Dallas, who gives a lot of teams bad matchup situations, like just a lot of good teams to go through. So it really would have came down to what seed you got and just catching somebody on the wrong day or on the right day. Like it would have been tough for Portland for sure. Just like it was tough. It was still tough for the Spurs in a lot of those series. It was tough for no team really had a cakewalk. Like it was tough for whoever made it to the finals. Yeah. They went through it. So yeah, I think the good thing about that is though the team that made it through from the West usually ended up being the team that won it all.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they would have had a good chance of winning if they made it through the West.
Wasn't Weber on the Kings around that time still too? Around
no,
not yet? Or he was gone?
No,
he left before that. Yeah,
yeah.
Being in the West was super tough, man.
Yeah, it was no joke.
So I'm gonna say this, Rook. We almost done. We're about to wrap it up. I'm gonna say this. I know if anybody watches this, I know how us D Rose fans we real sensitive. I know niggas, bro. Why ain't D Rose number one? Why? I'm like, bro. Like I said, I just can't see. LeBron made the finals like 9 years, bro. Like I'm sorry, like they wasn't beating that Miami team. It's just I'm sorry, it was not happening. The Cleveland team, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love, like Uncle Drew was on some different type of time for real. And if D Rose was healthy, I can't see it. I really can't see it. I could talk myself into a 7-game series, but I can't talk myself into D Rose beating LeBron. I just can't see it.
Remember that the one matchup they played in the playoffs. I think the Bulls won the first game. I remember LeBron switched up on Rose. They didn't win another game. That was it. They lost in 5.
That was the first year of Miami, right?
Yeah, I think that was it.
Yeah.
That Miami team wasn't getting beat. That team was too tough.
It was a lot of those teams too that we looked like that we thought we could beat the Heat or beat LeBron, but it wasn't happening. Another team that was kind of like that was that Wizards team that Gilbert Arenas and Antoine Jameson. There was a lot of hype around them being able to beat the King, but it didn't happen. No matter how much Hibachi was Hibachi, and it just wasn't happening. That's one thing I'll give to about LeBron, man. Like he really stomped out that East, and I love Derrick Rose, but also Derrick Rose was going to be it was going to be a rough ride for him anyway, being a player that's more or less guard, not the best perimeter jumper, not the best jump shot. It's really just an attack of the rim. The team was really more so like a defensive team at the time as well too. Well, it depends on what year, because they had some guys, they did have some runs of the Kurt Heinrich, the Dangs, the Ben Gordons around those times as well too. But we see what LeBron became, and there wasn't going to be no overcoming. It wasn't going to be able to overcome that. They probably lose 9 times out of 10. They probably lose, if not all 10 times.
Yeah.
The best chance he had, I believe, was when LeBron he went back to Cleveland. They played Chicago. D Rose was this was around the time like he had already been hurt, so he was kind of coming back. Y'all remember that top of the key, kind of towards the wing, the bank shot for the buzzer. They went up 2-1. The next game, LeBron hit another one in Chicago, and I think Chicago didn't win another game for real. The only team really that had something to say about LeBron's Eastern Conference reign was the Boston Celtics. Other than that, like he pretty much had his way.
Yeah. Pacers had 1 year when they gave him some fits with Paul George. They had that one.
Oh
season.
I think the Pistons gave him a little bit of a run early on, but he began to squash everybody out one by one.
Yeah, but I feel like Boston got. They almost got him in Miami, if not for Herculean effort, and got like a game 6. Other than that, like
I don't want to think about it.
You could argue that Boston kind of had their way with him a little bit.
Yeah. That's before LeBron got to kind of put his pieces around. At that time, Boston kind of like they linked up those stars to kind of have to. But by the time
they made it like their goal to like solely try and stop LeBron, but like he just had other guys, or he had other guys that kind of stepped up and hit some big shots for him, had some big games for him. So that still make me sick.
My bad for putting y'all on the spot with this one. Before we go, y'all got like one honorable mention apiece. Y'all got somebody y'all want to like on some like, okay, if they didn't get hurt, like y'all was in for one. You know what I mean?
Let me think. I could probably give a good one. I'm trying to go back into my thinking about back in like those mid 2000s. Who was really, man? I guess maybe not injury so much as just getting like in trouble. Like you mentioned, the Hibachi, Gilbert Arenas. Like he was really
coming to mind for sure.
He had a period where he was just like the 40-point king. He was just putting up 40-point games like it was nothing, man. I remember that. I remember like back from like the NBA Live game, he was unstoppable. Like Gilbert Arenas was really that dude at one point. And then obviously, you got the whole situation that happened. But man, he kind of pulled together later. But like, man, he had a little run. He had a run.
Man, it was a player that injuries kind of derailed them.
Not for nothing on some old school stuff. I used to hear about like Antonio McDyess, like especially like when he played like with Phoenix. I used to hear he used to get busy for real. Some of the OGs, if they'll watch this, I'm pretty sure they'll appreciate that for sure. But I did hear some good things about Antonio McDyess before he got hurt.
Yeah. Jamal Mashburn. I know he was.
You know somebody else on some low key stuff though. Josh Howard. I feel like Josh Howard got there. I'm a Mavericks fan. I used to love that 16 points a game, 17 a game. I used to love that.
Though, so he wasn't even. He wanted to be smoking. So he chose to weed.
He has messed up. Yeah, I think he has messed up knees though.
Yeah. A lot of those players who kind of had those knee injuries, like that, the microfracture surgery, like the Amari Stoudemire's. Then you fast forward like 5 years, and those surgeries, the technology advanced so much that those surgeries wasn't what they were anymore. So even like a Jamal Mashburn kind of player who ended up having like the microfracture surgery. Same thing with a Stoudemire. If the technology would have been, or the medical advancement would have been where we at now, maybe those guys would have hung in a little longer and did a little bit more. But injuries are just the most important thing, man. It's like a roll of the dice. You gotta end up being one of the greatest of all time, or you could be on that list right there.
Yeah. Well, shoot, man. I call this one no injuries, a what if story, man. I appreciate y'all boys for pulling up, man. We're gonna get back to it as soon as we can.
Yes, sir, man. Appreciate you having me on, bro.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.